So last night we got the Anakin episode of Ahsoka. We're over halfway through the season, so let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your thoughts on the latest episode of Ahsoka and the season as a whole. This will be a spoiler-packed review and discussion of the episode and series, so if you haven't watched it yet, go watch it, then come back over here and join the conversation. And let's get started talking about the latest episode. And the big selling point for episode 5 was the fact that Anakin, Hayden Christensen, was going to be in it. He was teased at the very end of the last episode. And so we were all kind of anticipating, what's this going to look like? How is this going to play out? And I thought they just found a really interesting way to kind of use his character, where it's introduced as kind of this catch up. Well, you look the same. Well, you look older. And then it kind of leads into, I got one more lesson to teach you. But then the way that it plays out is very much this exploration of how her experience with the Jedi was so tainted and so wrong. And it was multiple different layers to it of, from the get-go, Anakin's like, well, I was trained to be a keeper of the peace, but now I have to train you to be a soldier. It's not what, it's what the Jedi are supposed to do. That's not what's supposed to be training them. And it's not just that she's being trained to be a soldier. She's being trained to be a soldier by the guy that turns into Darth Vader. And her just perception of all of this is so tainted and broken because it wasn't what it was meant to be. Her experience was so far off from what it was intended to be. And so much of everything we've seen from her in Rebels and Mandalorian and now in this show kind of comes from this very broken experience that was during those formative years and shaped the galaxy that she grew up in. It's just a really creative, interesting way to do that. And I feel like on the show thus far, they've kind of had Ahsoka feel like a bit of a distant character. Feels like other characters are either warmer or more clear as to what's kind of going on with them, what they want, and what they're trying to do. And Ahsoka's been at more at arm's length. And I think this episode kind of just like unpacks that. Like, why is she the way that she is? And, you know, of course, if you've watched Clone Wars, you know that there was the most obvious falling out of the way she was handled and why she walked away from it. But really showing how much some of that stuff stayed with her and how far off it was from what it was intended to be. So kind of really looking at our character and doing that character study. And I said in my initial review that some of the direction was just kind of flat and not very interesting in the first few episodes directed by Dave Filoni. And I think this episode in particular, well, this episode on multiple different fronts feels like he put all of his creative energy into this episode, whereas the other one's a little bit stagnant, not particularly interesting in where they placed the cameras and stuff like that. And then you get to this episode and just even the way that they're all the ways that they're visualizing some of these Clone Wars flashbacks of Anakin charging off to battle. And then, of course, there's those flashes to where it's the Vader silhouette around him. And just really cool images, like iconic Star Wars images. And they do it several times and in several different ways that just capture, like as soon as you see that flash, you just feel this, whoa. Oh, yeah, the weight of that. That's what she sees. That's what's in her mind. Really cool stuff. Nicely done. And like I said, whereas contrasting the stagnant nature of images in the first couple episodes to just, that feels like some imagery that is going to be very iconic with Star Wars moving forward in a certain sense. Like other touches in there with when you start getting into the crescendo of the episode, and the use of the music, really nicely done, of just filling everything out and giving it this epic feel as we're trying to delay these people over here, Ahsoka's trying to do her thing. And you kind of sense her becoming the hero that she's been avoiding being for a while. Even in something as simple as talking to the space whales and the music and the journey she was on in the first episode, elevating everything kind of taking place and pushing it further and further. Another thing to talk about in here, of course, Hayden returning. We got him a little bit last year in Kenobi, but I mean, it was legitimately just a little bit, just a scene. Here you get a full half of an episode dedicated to him, and dialogue based, also action based in multiple settings. And of course, Hayden has been criticized for his acting in episodes 2 and 3, where some of just hammy overcooked, but also being handed tricky dialogue when you're like, giving an angsty speech about sand. That's a tough one to sell, in particular if you're working with George Lucas, who infamously is not an actor's director. And so here, I think this probably is the best he's probably been. And you kind of assume that when you have someone have 20 years to improve as an actor, returns to the part that will make him, of course, be the entire defining role of his career. He returns to it much older, more mature, and probably working with a director that is better with actors than Mr. Lucas was. And so you kind of, not that like, let's bring out the awards and hand him to or anything like that, but just a much more stronger performance. And you go, oh man, I wish maybe some of that, we could have gotten this guy in episodes 2 and 3 a little bit more. But just, it's cool to see him again. And this relationship that was so prominent in the Clone Wars, such basis for the Clone Wars, and then you finally see it in live action. And Clone Wars have always been canon, but as soon as they're in two different formats, they feel like they're separate. But it's like, you don't want to have two layers of canon, but when the movies are in one format and then animation is this other thing that's auxiliary, expanding things, it feels separate. So as much as it shouldn't, as soon as you see it in live action, it just feels like it gives it a bit more legitimacy. And that's cool. It's cool whenever you can have stuff like that says, no, we're not treating that anything like second tier. We're making that the basis for this show that we're doing. We want to do a very Star Wars-y show, and we're basing it off the animated. That's cool. And just taking it very seriously, getting Hayden going all out the same way I was going to say the same way they did Kenobi. I would say they're doing Ahsoka much better, way better than they did Kenobi, which in its own right, I guess that's exciting that they're like, let's really do this right. Really confused why they didn't do Kenobi right. Trying to think of what other things to think about in here. I probably should throw this in here. There's people all over Twitter that are just going bananas for this episode. And a lot of people, I've seen a number of people having Ahsoka as their favorite of the Star Wars shows. And, last night's episode was the best episode of Star Wars that we've ever had, of television Star Wars. I guess the word episode has a different meaning in the Star Wars, or can be used in multiple ways in the realm of Star Wars. Best episode of Star Wars television we've ever had. And I don't know that I'm going that far on it. I thought it was very good. I'm enjoying the show. It's delivering what I hope to get from a Star Wars show. And then I've seen some other people like really saying, oh, this show doesn't work. It's just too much for insiders, too stagnant, stale, nostalgia bait. I'd say I'm much more, I didn't even say in the middle, because I am leaning towards the people that are very positive towards it, but a little bit more of an average of the two groups, where I can see where both groups are coming from. I've watched every episode of Clone Wars, but I'm by no means a big fan of Clone Wars. I watched through it as like, I should watch through this. And there were episodes that I liked, but I've never loved Clone Wars. I thought I connected by far the most with season 7, where I just felt it was the culmination of everything they'd been doing. It's like, that's pretty cool now that it's really getting it overlapping with the movies. That's pretty cool. You know, a lot of the earlier seasons are pretty tough for me to like binge through. And then I watched through all of Rebels. And similarly, like I enjoyed a good bit of it. The more that it kind of connected into the movies or Darth Vader or other things, the more that it felt impactful. Kind of the more random episodic episodes was like, okay, that was fine. But it's not a show that I've revisited. I watched it when it originally aired. And so it's not, these aren't the characters. This isn't the lore of Star Wars that I know well. I know it a little bit. I'm familiar with it fairly. I have watched the episodes, but just really the one time for the most part. And so when I watch Ahsoka, which really is essentially Rebels season 5, it can feel a little bit at arm's length because I'm trying to like, all right, who's this character again? What was the relationship there again? And I saw someone on Twitter describe Ahsoka as, it's like going to go see a band play live that you like the genre, but you don't know any of the songs. Until the Anakin song comes on. You're like, oh, I love the Anakin song. And then they continue on with a bunch of songs that you don't know. Everyone else is singing along. Everyone is so excited. And you're like, I guess I like the genre, but I just don't know this. Thought that phrasing was pretty good. That's a little bit kind of like my experience of watching this. Like I have some familiarity with it, but it really doesn't do much to help pull in people that don't know the lore. You're like, well, this is Jason. His dad was Kanan Jarrus. They just say that. And if you've seen Rebels and like remember it well, then it's, oh, wow. If you don't know these names, then it's just like just throwing random names out there. And they don't do much to make it an on-ramp. And I wish they did, in particular, because it's so Star Wars-y. It's like, it's about light, dark force, masters, apprentices, Padawan, galactic threats, Empire returning. And it's not even just like it has elements from the movies. We had Hayden in there. It's elements from the classic books because Thrawn is our main villain. I understand that they brought Thrawn over in the new books as well as and then in Rebels. But we're going back to the Timothy Zahn trilogy, Heir to the Empire, back 30 years ago. So we're pulling in the extended universe. Of course, we've got Clone Wars and Rebels in here. We're tying into the lore of The Mandalorian. So on a bunch of levels, this is the Star Warsiest of things we've ever had because it's all of them. It's got all of it in here, but not in a way that is accessible, I would say, for everyone. It's not like an on-ramp if you missed some of these things. They're just Thrawn's out there. Well, if you didn't watch those episodes of Rebels, then it's like, okay. If you didn't read those books, okay. Why does that matter? And even if you have read some of the books, it's even more confusing because Thrawn is not Vader. Thrawn is not Palpatine. He's a much more layered, nuanced character that's not like a Imperial true believer. So when we're like, oh no, Thrawn's returning, I'm not sure exactly what that means to them in this current context. And the show hasn't sold me on that. And I think that's other thing where I'm getting a little bit worried about the show at this moment. As much as like last night's episode was awesome and the week before that episode was awesome, individual episodes of like, oh, that was really cool. But first 2 episodes, we teased this gigantic threat out there, way over there. And it takes us 5 episodes to get to the point in time where we're going over there. But we haven't expanded on what that threat is. The classic problem with these Disney Plus shows is that they introduce an interesting scenario and then rush the finale. It feels like they meander in the middle and rush the finale. Now, our meandering here was awesome, but we haven't expanded on that threat. So I'm like, why are we afraid of the people? What exactly? We don't know what their end goal is. Ray Stevenson is this awesome villain who's talking about how he's for the greater good. He has big issues with Ahsoka and her master, but he's also someone that seems noble. What's going on with this guy? Like, what's his end goal? We don't know yet. Why is Thrawn a threat? Like, where is this all headed? So I hope we don't have to rush that too much, and I hope it doesn't. They're setting up this Dave Filoni movie in the future that's the culmination of all these shows. Very cool stuff. I hope that it doesn't feel like this whole series was a tease for whatever's next. I hope it has some sort of big payoff in the end. But, at the pace we're currently moving, we got 3 episodes left, and we haven't seen Thrawn yet. We don't know what he's up to. So that makes me a little bit nervous of like, all right, we had some really cool stuff in here, but let's hope it really pays off towards the end. But I know a lot of people have been DMing me some questions like, what did you think about seeing this in it? What did you think about this? And honestly, I haven't had the strongest opinions on a lot of some of the plot twists in here because I just don't know exactly where they're going yet. So if Sabine Wren in last week's episode essentially join the bad guys on their quest, and I got to know where they're heading with. Like, I don't have it. Like, I'm like, oh, that's brutal. Kind of saw this happening all along, though, because she was always behaving in this manner of, oh, yeah, I'm on your side. Yeah, greater threat, greater threat, greater threat. Yeah, but my friend, that's what she's been doing the whole season. So her doing that again isn't too surprising. Now, her doing it in a context where she'd been trained for several episodes feels like even more of a betrayal. But you got to see where it's headed. Like, what are we doing with this? Where's she headed? That's kind of where I'm at. I just need to see how some of these things are going to play out before I have a strong opinion on them. But, in terms of the Star Wars shows, I feel like there's a pretty big gap there's these ones that just didn't really work for me. Kenobi, Book of Boba Fett, Mando Season 3, and then kind of up top, Mando Season 1 and 2, Andor, and then Ahsoka. I don't even know how I'd rank some of these ones up here because they do different things well in different ways, but it feels like there's a pretty distinct gap between there, and this is definitely on the high side of when they promised us Star Wars TV shows. I wanted to see stuff like this, and I'm seeing it. And this is really what I really expected Kenobi to feel like. Like watching Ahsoka makes me go, right, you can do this. You can do it. So what was that stuff? What was Kenobi? Why did that happen? Why was Kenobi the way that it was? Anyway, this is about Ahsoka and how it's cool. So if I seemed a little bit negative in the back half, like I said, make it clear. I'm thoroughly enjoying the season. This is what I want these shows to be. There are a few things I'm a little concerned about. I wish it was more accessible for everyone. And I've been saying that since before it came out, that I was very nervous that it was going to be a little bit inaccessible to people. And some people have mentioned that. And I felt a bit of that too. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. And keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.